For the past couple of months, I've been switching between this iPhone 14 Pro and this Pixel 7 Pro. What initially started as curiosity turned out to be a near switching experience. I might have just found something that makes me want to ditch iPhones. So let's compare these two very different phones to find out what that is. First things first, the design. I know this is kinda subjective, but still. Two phones look drastically different, both from the front and from the back. The iPhone has flat glass on both sides and a flat stainless steel frame, very solid, sturdy, and yet elegant. Pixel, on the other hand, is much rounder. The glass on both sides is more curved, it's glossy instead of frosted like on the iPhone. The frame itself is less pronounced. The Pixel 7 Pro is much more ergonomic and is much easier to hold. The camera bump on both phones look totally different. On an iPhone, it's a piece of glass with 3 camera modules in a triangular array. On Pixel, the metal frame morphs into the camera bump, which also hosts 3 cameras. But on Pixel, the camera array looks worse in my opinion. While on iPhone every camera module is separate, on Pixel 2 cameras are sharing a glass piece, while the third camera is kinda set aside. It's a very distinctive look, not gonna lie, but to me it looks somewhat sloppy. As I said, the design is very subjective. I can't definitely say which design I like more. On one hand, the iPhone design is a classic look, on the other hand, a Pixel offers something new and unique, at least for the back. So let's call it a draw here, okay? What I can't call a draw in any scenario is the front panel design and the displays. Pixel looks very generic from the front, big display with hole punch cutout for the selfie camera and a substantial chin. This chin really bothers me. Why does it have to have it? Apple has figured out chins in 2017. Equal bezels on iPhone just look better to me. Period. But what doesn't look as good on the iPhone is the dynamic island. Just look how much bigger it is than a small cutout on the Pixel. On Pixel, it's very subtle, almost unnoticeable. On the iPhone 14 Pro, however, you constantly see it. It's too far from the display edge and is a real annoyance when you're watching a video, for example, playing games. But that's just the Apple way. They took a drawback and made it into an advantage. On Pixel, this hole for the camera is just that. It has 0 features. An iPhone 14 Pro, well, you know what Dynamic Island can do. So in terms of front side design, I will call the iPhone 14 Pro a winner. The displays on these phones are very similar yet very different. On the iPhone 14 Pro, it's a 6.1-inch LTPO OLED that goes up to 2000 nits in brightness with ProMotion and superb color accuracy. In over half a year of using this iPhone, I've had almost 0 complaints about the display, except one. It can't really sustain its max brightness for long periods of time. The phone heats up and the brightness drops to standard numbers. So there's that. On Pixel 7 Pro, however, the display is much more interesting. It's also an LTPO OLED panel, but at 6.7 inches. It also supports 120Hz refresh rate and high brightness. Pixel's screen goes only up to 1500 nits, but it's a sustained brightness. The phone can go all day at 1500 nits instead of like 10 minutes on iPhone 14 Pro. Plus, the display on Pixel 7 Pro has an under-display fingerprint reader, which I find very convenient. Pixel also has Face Unlock, which does somewhat resemble Face ID. Another thing I like about the display in Pixel is its supreme always-on display. It shows the clock and a few small widgets, and that's all. The iPhone's always-on also shows the clock and widgets, but on top of that, a wallpaper. Yes, you can turn it off, but still, overall, I personally like Google's approach more. Always on Pixel 7 Pro feels cleaner and more refined, less cluttered and overloaded. And I still haven't talked about those 120Hz. On both phones, they feel so different. 120Hz on iPhone do feel responsive and fast, but you always feel that the animations are limiting the display. On Pixel, however, animations are super fast, so the high refresh rate display has no constraints. Pixel's display just feels much faster than the iPhone's. It may not be as smooth and refined, but on Pixel, the whole phone feels quicker and snappier. Yes, Android animations are shorter than on the iPhone, but even if apps take the same amount of time to load on both phones, the 120Hz and Pixel 7 Pro just feel more responsive. So I will take a leap in judgment here and award the victory to Pixel 7 Pro. Next up, performance. This will be a quick one, I promise. Pixel 7 Pro Pro is equipped with Google-designed Tensor G2 chip and 8 gigs of RAM. The iPhone 14 Pro has the latest A16 inside and 6 gigs of RAM. There is no point in talking about Geekbench scores or Antutu scores. Both phones are super fast, apps open instantly, the interface is super smooth, and the responsiveness is top-notch at all times. Here, those faster animations on Pixel give it an advantage, making the phone feel faster than the iPhone, but when it actually comes to opening apps, two phones go neck and neck at all times. And while we are at performance, I simply cannot ignore gaming. Games on both phones tend to play beautifully on the highest settings. Of course, Tensor G2 is not as powerful as the A16 chip, so sometimes you can see a few dropped frames here and there. For example, Call of Duty works great on both phones most of the time, but when your gaming session gets long, the iPhone heats up and drops down the brightness. Pixel, on the other hand, doesn't drop the brightness but still heats up, which leads to throttling and occasional slowdowns. The same goes for PUBG on both phones, but if you just lower the settings to medium, you will be able to avoid all these problems altogether. Overall, I'd say both phones are great for gaming, but only in short sessions. I feel like the performance of flagship phones is something we can start taking for granted now, so let's not pay too much attention and move on. Now to the most interesting part of the comparison, the cameras. The iPhone 14 Pro and Google Pixel 7 Pro both have triple camera setups, a standard wide-angle lens, an ultra-wide-angle lens, and a zoom lens. The iPhone has a 48-megapixel main camera sensor, while the Pixel has a slightly higher resolution sensor at 50 megapixels. Both phones have 12-megapixel autofocus ultra-wide lenses. The main difference is in the telephoto lenses. The Pixel 7 Pro has a 48-megapixel sensor with 5x telephoto reach, while the iPhone 14 Pro has a 12-megapixel sensor with 3x telephoto. And trust me, that zoom difference will shock you when we get there. Comparing photos taken in good light, the image quality is very similar. The Pixel 7 Pro produces images with a slightly more HDR effect and a slightly warmer, more saturated color palette, while the iPhone's shots are more realistic. In low light scenes, the iPhone captures slightly more detail, while the Pixel is more susceptible to lens flare and tends to sometimes make the photo blurry. The 2x lens on both devices uses a crop of the main sensor and performs decently. The images are really closely matched, but what shocked me was the 5x zoom on Pixel. I don't know how that's possible, but 3x zoom on the iPhone has performed better in almost every scenario for me. For macro shots, both phones perform well, with a slight advantage in detail for the iPhone. In portrait mode, both models create a good visual separation from the background. The Pixel 7 Pro has a slight edge in detail and subjects, but the iPhone's result usually looks more natural. As for the video, both phones shoot 4K 60, both have cinematic mode and super stabilized mode. This won't come as a surprise, but the iPhone 14 Pro is a clear winner here. All videos look better on it, colors are more balanced, the image shakes less, the bokeh in cinematic mode is simply amazing, and the action mode is much better than Google's creation. Cinematic videos on iPhone are almost always better. Videos from Pixel can appear shaky at times, and the videos on Pixel are more saturated too. A bit too saturated if you ask me. But despite all that, Pixel has one huge advantage. You can pause the video recording. Overall, after using both phones, I can say that the iPhone camera is more reliable. It tends to produce good shots more often. Pixel sometimes can pick the wrong exposure, white balance, or add too much HDR. The iPhone is really just point and shoot, while the Pixel 7 Pro is a serious tool. If you know what you're doing, you can squeeze amazing images from the Pixel, but most people won't ever go that far. So I'd call it a draw in the photo department, but the iPhone's victory in video. However, there is one issue that I simply can't ignore: ecosystem. With Pixel 7 Pro being only Android device, it does feel secluded. Of course, most of the time, everything works fine, but to me, it's hard to live without the iPhone simply because of the ecosystem. No AirDrop, no FaceTime, no universal clipboard, and all sorts of other small things are missing from Pixel. I think if I had a Pixel tablet and Pixel Buds, it would have been a better experience, but if we put the ecosystem aside, I just love Android. It's great. Not perfect, but great. It gives so much freedom to do things, to make the phone personal and unique, rearranging apps, changing the visual appearance on a very deep level, speeding up the animations and all sorts of stuff. Add to it a wide range of smart features of Android that are missing on the iPhone. We made a video a month ago where we compared both systems, so check it out to know more. But all I can say is, wow, Android is cool, sometimes a bit laggy, but cool. The final piece of comparison must be the battery life. On paper, the battery on Pixel 7 Pro is quite a bit bigger than on the iPhone, 5,000 mAh instead of 3,200 mAh. But does this difference affect the battery life? Yes, it does, but not as much as you may think. The iPhone 14 Pro, in my use case, usually lives almost 2 days, which is a lot. Pixel, on the other hand, lives a bit longer. If I use the phones the same way, the iPhone will die in the evening of the second day. Pixel will still have some charge when I go to bed and around 10% in the morning. But still, I have to charge both phones once every 2 days, just because it's more convenient. But nonetheless, Pixel 7 Pro is a clear winner here. So, was there really that one thing that almost made me ditch iPhones? Well, no. It's a combination of factors. Pixel 7 Pro is like a breath of fresh air. It excels in some areas, but disappoints in others. It offers so much, but at the same time, a bit too much. Using Pixel is like being on a huge playground. You have so many options to choose from, but halfway through, you get tired and want to go home. With an iPhone, your playground is smaller, but you know that no matter the activity you choose, you will end up satisfied. That's the main difference between these two phones. One is open and free, offering more than needed, and the other is closed and limited, but delivering just enough to use everything it gives you. So to me, there is no clear winner here. I love both of these phones and will probably continue using both of them. So thank you for watching, guys, and see you in the next one.